On April 30th, 1993, Ogoni farmers in the village of Biara protested against an American subcontracting company appointed by Shell named Wilbros and accused it of destroying their newly planted crops to make way for the construction of an oil pipeline, refusing to pay them compensation, and failing to conduct an environmental impact assessment of their project as stipulated by Nigerian law. When Wilbros called for security to tackle the protesters, soldiers shot and killed one of the protesters and wounded 11 others, including a mother of 5, Karalolo Kogbara, whose left arm had to be amputated. As Saro Wiwa was abroad in May 1993, other Mossop leaders agreed to a deal with Wilbros for the company to pay compensation to those killed and wounded during the protests. When Saro Wiwa learned of the deal, he repudiated it and claimed that in his absence, the other Mossop leaders had sold out the Ogoni cause for a paltry sum of money. This led to some of Ogonis accusing those who negotiated the deal of betraying their people in exchange for bribes from international oil companies. Secondly, federal politics in faraway Abuja widened the rift between Mossop's leadership triumvirates. Saro Wiwa argued that Ogonis should boycott the June 12, 1993 presidential election, Nigeria's first presidential election after a decade of military dictatorship. Saro Wiwa felt that participation in the election would legitimize the constitutional order which denied the Ogoni control of the natural resource extracted from their land. In contrast, Letton and Kobani argued that the Ogoni should participate in the election and vote for a candidate, Moshood Abiola of the SDP, from whom they could extract a commitment to address the Ogoni's grievances. Letton and Kobani had joined the SDP in 1993 in violation of a Mossop convention that its officers could not simultaneously hold posts in Mossop and in partisan federal political groups. Letton was also later appointed director of Abiola's campaign organization. The following year, Saro Wiwa himself flouted the same Mossop convention when he stood for election to the National Constitutional Conference. Mossop elders were enraged when, without consultation with or approval from their steering committee, Saro Wiwa unilaterally declared during a televised interview with CNN that Ogonis would boycott the June 12, 1993 election. On June 2, 1993, Mossop Steering Committee held a stormy meeting at the house of its president, Garrick Letton, in Port Harcourt. The boycott issue was so passionately debated and divisive that Mossop Vice President Kobani put the motion to a vote. Mossop voted in favor of a boycott by 11 votes to 6. However, Letton and Kobani accused Saro Wiwa of contriving the vote by inviting NYCOP members to the meeting and allowing them to vote even though they had no right to do so. The next day, Letton, Kobani, Albert Badi, T.N. Nweke and other Ogoni elders visited Saro Wiwa at his house and asked him to rescind the boycott or migrate his impact by leaving each Ogoni person to decide whether or not to vote as a matter of their individual choice. Saro Wiwa refused. Letton and Kobani resigned from Mossop in protest. In his resignation letter, Kobani described NYCOP as a private army of stormtroopers bent on insulting, intimidating, and marginalizing the top leadership of the Ogoni nationality in Mossop. Under Saro Wiwa's influence, Mossop boycotted the ill-fated June 12, 1993 elections. The boycott was enforced as much as it was observed. NYCOP youths policed the boycott by barricading roads to block election officers from delivering election materials and by intimidating voters into staying away from the polling booths. They threatened to burn the home of anyone who came out to vote. In retaliation for Saro Wiwa's address and harassment by security forces, NYCOP members attacked and burned police stations, raided their armories, and looted shops. A group of 11 prominent Ogonis apologized for and disassociated themselves from the violence and clashes with the police. The apology was printed in the national newspaper. To Saro Wiwa and the youth, the apology was evidence of the older leaders' whistling status. Angry youths attacked and burned the houses of several Ogoni leaders and forced them to flee. To those attacked, the attacks were evident that Saro Wiwa was using NYCOP as his personal gang of enforcers. Following Letton and Kobani's resignations, Saro Wiwa became the new Mossop president and Ledon Miti, a lawyer, its new vice president. NYCOP members who were loyal to Saro Wiwa depicted Letton and Kobani as traitors to the Ogoni cause. In local parlance, they were termed vultures, those who collaborated with the Ogoni enemies to betray and prey upon their own people. The term vulture became a dangerous epithet with which to be associated. It came to represent the worst form of treachery to the Ogoni cause, and to those to whom it was applied faced violence or even death. The leadership rift in Mossop and the accusations and counter-accusations of betrayal and collusion with the government created an intense atmosphere of suspicion and witch hunting. In response to rising insecurity, Ogoni villagers formed vigilante groups of youths, often including NYCOP members. These groups saw themselves as the guardians of their community. Exhilarated by the power of being unofficial police, they investigated crimes as varied as theft and witchcraft. Ogoni youths became increasingly rebellious and in some instances extorted money from villagers. They also embarked on witch hunting expeditions to expose and execute villagers who had allegedly engaged in sorcery. Conveniently, an accusation of being a witch could sometimes be refuted only by paying money to the youths. The youth also procured the services of herbalists who provided them with magic charms that made them invulnerable, such as amulets sewn into the skin and potions which intoxicated and made the youth reckless and unpredictable, as much as they made them feel invincible. Letton later claimed that NYCOP members conducted secret trials during which Saro Wiwa's opponents were sentenced to death and their properties burned. Saro Wiwa exchanged hostile correspondence with Bade and Kobani. In a withering letter, Saro Wiwa told Kobani, "Edward, I will rebuke you as the Mene Kapangbara of Bodo, your chief. When are you going to take responsibility for your own failures? I cannot stop you from envying my achievements. I invite you to copy my ways and you'll find that which you desire most, the Ken Saro Wiwa image. Good advice, and it is free." In addition to the intra-group struggles, Mossop relationship with the federal government and oil companies soured further. Security forces arrested Saro Wiwa a number of times in 1993 and confiscated his passport in June 1993 in order to prevent him from traveling to Vienna to attend a UN World Conference on Human Rights. In July 1993, he and two other Mossop members were arrested and charged with sedition. Yet Saro Wiwa still believed he could extract concessions from the government, especially when Abacha became head of state. Saro Wiwa's lawyer Barry Kumbe said it's true that Ken initially welcomed the Abacha coup. Relations between Abacha and Saro Wiwa were cordial enough for Abacha to apologize to Saro Wiwa after his passport was seized by security agents and ordered it to be returned. Saro Wiwa had also asked Abacha to send the army into Ogoni land to protect Ogonis from attacks by their neighbors such as the Andonis. Saro Wiwa walked straight into the trap that gave the government the pretext to do what it had always wanted to do: impose a military crackdown on Ogoni land. On May 21, 1994, Saro Wiwa and Miti were traveling in separate cars to a series of rallies near Jioku when police at the Bokboje junction stopped them and told them to turn back. Miti recalled, "I was driving in front and the police who were escorting us told us to stop. We stopped and I came out from the car and the police told me that we couldn't go any further. They said they had taken a decision that Ken had to turn back. They said I had to go one way and Ken another. They wanted to separate us. So I only walked to Ken's vehicle and he wound down his window. He said, 'What is happening?' I said, 'These people say you can't go any further,' and all that, and he said, 'Okay.' He told the driver to turn around. I said, 'I'll go home and pick up my things and I'll meet you.' He said, 'All right, join me in the office,' and that was it." A crowd of their supporters congregated around their cars and the two conferred before complying with the police order. The government claimed that before departing, Saro spoke to some of the supporters in an Ogoni dialect and told them to deal with the vultures in Jioku, who were on the government's payroll and who were colluding with the government to obstruct him. As Saro departed less than 1 mile away, the Benemene, or traditional chief of Gokana, James Pago Bajia, was preparing to host an important meeting at his palace in Jioku. One of the meeting's purpose was to arrange a reception for 2 prominent Ogonis from Gokana who had been appointed to the River State government, Barinem Kiobel and Mene Baragba. Kobel had recently been appointed as a commissioner for commerce and industry, and Baragba the chairman of the Gokana Caretaker Committee in Gokana local government area. Dozens of the Ogoni elites attended the meeting. The attendees included Chief Samuel Orage, a former commissioner for health in the River State government, his younger brother, Chief Theophilus P. Orage, secretary to the Gokana Council of Chiefs, Albert Tombari Bade, a former secretary to the River State government, Edward Kobani and his younger brother, Mohammed, and Chief Francis Espai. Bajia did not realize that his palace would become a crime scene later that day. Chief Obadiah Nalalelo, chairman of the Gokana Council of Chiefs and Elders, declared the meeting open at some time between 11 and 11:30 a.m. Edward Kobani was the first person to address the meeting, followed by Bade. As Bade spoke, the NYCOP member named Theophilus Ntu arrived at the palace on a motorcycle. Ntu informed the crowd milling around that the police had blocked Saro attempt to address a rally in the town and that some Ogoni vultures were behind the police action. He also alleged that Saro told Ogoni youths that the vultures were meeting at the palace to share money given to them by the government and Shell and should be dealt with. Mohammed Kobani or David Kinom came out of the meeting hall and remonstrated with Ntu. In the intense atmosphere prevailing, Ntu's appearance had an incendiary effect on the crowd. Ntu left, but a few minutes later, a mob of several hundred or several thousand people, chanting war songs and wielding machetes, bottles, knives, stones, and clubs, descended on the palace. Some had traveled there on foot, others by motorcycle. Precisely how hundreds of teenagers and young men knew where the meeting was taking place and assembled so quickly is a matter of speculation. The brutality of what happened next needs to be described in detail as it provides a context for subsequent events during the following 18 months. A member of the crowd allegedly shouted, "It should be," a war cry, and encouraged the others to attack the chiefs. The mob besieged the meeting hall and brutally assaulted Chief Bai, Nalalelo, Bade, and the Orage brothers with fists, knives, clubs, and broken bottles. They beat Bai unconscious and seriously wounded Theophilus Orage's right eye. Perhaps thinking that Bai was dead, the mob turned their attention away long enough for Mohammed Kobani and others to drag him back inside the hall. Some of the injured men retreated into a corner of the hall, but the attackers pursued them inside and continued beating them. A young woman was among the attackers. The mob then destroyed vehicles, vandalized the premises, and hacked Bade to death. They turned down their attention to Edward Kobani. His younger brother, Mohammed Kobani, was wounded while trying to defend him. Edward was hit with a rake that fractured his skull. The mob dragged his corpse out onto the palace veranda and mutilated it in an unspeakable manner. Bai and Bade managed to escape and tried to flee in a taxi, but were prevented by doing so by the pursuing crowd. They also tried to shelter in a Methodist church, but were stopped once again. A woman took pity on Bai and Bade after seeing their bloodied and disabled state and allowed them into her house. When the attackers threatened to kill her unless she handed the men over, the woman had to give them up. The crowd stripped both men, beat them again, and dragged them around. Bade, an asthmatic, tried to use his inhaler, but the crowd, mistaking it for a device that he could use to call for help, snatched it away and beat him to death. Although some people fled, a crowd of several hundred or a few thousand still remained. They took Tipi Orage's corpse away in a wheelbarrow, and those of Bade, Kobani, and Sama Orage were removed in a white Volkswagen belonging to Nalelu before being set ablaze until they were burnt beyond recognition. News of the violence began to spread. After hearing that her father had been attacked, Theophilus Orage's daughter went to the Benemenes palace by motorcycle taxi. When she arrived, the motorcycle was unable to get near because of the crowd. However, the mob recognized her and attacked her. Although she was badly beaten, she and her siblings managed to escape on motorcycles while being pursued. Some people who escaped reported the mayhem to police officers at Popi Junction and the Bori police station. The police officers at both locations informed them that in the absence of their commanding officer, they could not mobilize as they did not have the orders to do so. After seeing that his brother had been killed, Mohammed Kobani ran behind Biaga's house and took refuge in Digbare Seko Shrine, the shrine of the Ogoni spirits, a location considered sacrosanct. Chief Pai and Bajia joined him and hid with him in the shrine. Although the Ogonis are nominally Christians, they still hold to pre-Christian animist beliefs. While the attackers were willing to commit murder, they considered killing someone inside the shrine a sacrilege that would bring curses on them, their families, and future descendants. They urged Bajia, who was the Benemene, was regarded as the custodian of the shrine, to pour a libation to allow them to remove Kobani from the shrine so they could kill him. Bajia refused the request and entered the shrine. Several angry youths set fire to the palace and 3 cars belonging to Bade, Orage, and Kobani. Some gruesome claims were later made. Letting alleged that Theophilus Orage was cooked and eaten by his murderers. They cooked and ate him. I am ashamed to be an Ogoni. In fact, I no longer consider myself an Ogoni. After several hours of violence, the mob finally dispersed around 5 or 6 p.m. after hearing gunshots from approaching soldiers.